I'm Sarah Vaya. I'm a professor and climate extension specialist at the University of Maryland. And we're going to talk about sustainable landscaping and stormwater management today, because there are four interconnected environmental problems that really require that we rethink the way we are landscaping residential settings. So the first problem, an obvious problem, is the climate problem. We are having warming from unprecedented increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide. And this is already causing serious impacts on weather, ecosystems, water availability, et cetera. So for our best future, we really need to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases and remove carbon from the atmosphere pretty much in any way that we can. The second problem is the soil problem. Our soil, not just in North America, but globally, has been seriously degraded by both agriculture and conventional landscaping practices. You can look at these pictures of lawns and see the typical lawn usually has a lot of bare spaces. It's very compacted. I'll show you a little bit more about the limitations of turfgrass in terms of actually providing healthy soil. But compaction that we see in in lawn reduces the infiltration of water. So water tends to run off or pond instead of soaking in. And when we have increased erosion and runoff rather than infiltration, that reduces the ability of the soil to purify the water. And that's actually a very important thing in natural landscapes. So this leads to another one of the problems, the water problem. Our microbial communities in the soil, which are very important to overall healthy soil outcomes, are highly degraded now. And that reduces the ability of the soil to actually the scientific word is nutrient cycling, but what that means is it reduces the ability of the soil to decompose organic matter and release the nutrients for the use by plants. And this makes the soil more infertile, right? Seeming more infertile, and causes people to use a lot more fertilizer and chemicals, another contributor to the water problem. And also the monoculture that we have in most lawns has really reduced our habitat for natural enemies, which are insects and spiders and things which prey on pest insect species. And this also affects the pollinator availability, because there are no plants here that pollinators can feed off of, or they're nothing suitable for their offspring, their caterpillars and other offspring to grow up on. So this gives us less pollination and more pest problems. And this is part of the big biodiversity problem that we're facing now worldwide. The water problem. Okay, we're having more heavy rains as a part of climate change, and this is leading to a lot more inland and coastal flooding, additional erosion and runoff, again, compounded by the sorry state of the soil. And this little cartoon just basically shows that whatever goes onto your lawn or onto your driveway makes its way down onto streets, goes down into the gutters and stormwater runoff, and eventually is discharged out into water bodies. And, this is a way that fertilizer, for example, is transferred into Chesapeake Bay, causing the big dead zone. And the way that most municipalities manage stormwater is through what they call hard engineering. That is just gutters and pipes like this, which transfer the water, which could be, or usually is, highly polluted, down into a detention or into the bay or wherever. So it's transferring the pollution that's in the water somewhere else. And this causes streams and coastal waters to become highly polluted by fertilizer, chemicals, pathogens, sediment, erosion of soil, etc. So these are this is an example of a piece of what they call hard engineering or hard infrastructure, where stormwater just drains down this concrete sort of, I don't know what you call this actually for a formal term, but this concrete depression, and it transfers, you can see it's transferring a lot of eroded soil and everything else down to wherever the body of water is. And when people cut their lawns and lawn clippings go on, this goes down into the storm sewer and clogs everything up and just basically compounds the problem. So we've got a big problem with water. The biodiversity problem. We've had a huge loss of habitat for all living things from development, which really sometimes just seems to be relentless, climate change, and our landscaping practices. And the reliance on this monoculture of introduced turfgrass basically leaves not very much for animals of all sorts to inhabit, and that reduces the diversity of animals that we have and plants, of course, that we have in the landscape. So the loss of birds and insects in this introduced monoculture reduces pollination and allows pests to increase, as I mentioned earlier. So what are the solutions to these four problems? Rethink our suburban landscapes and make them part of the climate and stormwater solution instead of part of the climate and stormwater problem. So if we want to have lawn in our yards or in our municipal landscapes, try to replace it as much as we can with low-mow, low-input grasses, which I call lawn mimics. Like this is the lawn mimic. It looks like lawn, but it's not the tall fescue that you're used to having. Use plants for water management and to increase biodiversity. So we can actually use plants to help us manage water rather than just shunting the water down some concrete swale and then into a concrete pipe and transfer that pollution to some eventual body of water. A part of the use of plants for water management involves reducing impervious surface so we can have water soak in instead of being transported somewhere else. And we can landscape for stormwater management. So that's a lot of what I'll be talking about in the later part, the second part of the talk. I think we all have to, really come to grips with the fact that lawn is our default landscape. This is sort of what do you put down around a new house? You put down lawn, of course, that's what everybody expects. And this picture from Ryan Holmes really encapsulates, I think, the point of view about lawn. The ideal home includes this expanse of manicured lawn. It's just what people expect. And I live in Howard County, and there's a lot of big houses around here, and they just have these giant lawns like this, all mowed, very neatly manicured. But there's a major dark side of these big lawns through both environmental and economic impacts. And I'll just describe those briefly now. The environmental cost of lawn. A few years ago, there was a study by NASA that revealed that there's 42 million acres of lawn in the US. Okay, now it's a little hard maybe to visualize what that means, but that makes lawn our biggest irrigated crop across the US. There's more acres of lawn than there are acres of corn and soybeans combined, okay? In Maryland, we have 1.3 million acres of lawn, and we have 1.28 million acres of cropland. So the same amount of lawn as cropland. Now, what are we getting from this lawn? No food, no fiber, nothing useful, just, something around our homes and in our municipal areas that is green and looks nice. But there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining these lawns to look like this, and a lot of chemical use, et cetera. So all this lawn across the country, not just in Maryland, uses between 30 and 50% of our municipal water. And in the West, they're in the middle of a historic drought. They haven't seen drought like this in 1,200 years, and yet they're still, in many cases, putting a lot of water on the lawn. Yard tools, lawn mowers, leaf blowers, weed whackers, contribute 5% of all US greenhouse gas emissions. That's really a lot. Agriculture, well, actually, I won't compare, but this is a lot of US emissions. This is a little cartoon from the California Air Resources Board. And it basically tells us that if we use our lawnmower, and this is an efficient lawnmower, for 1 hour, that's the same in terms of climate impact as driving a Toyota Camry, which is not a inefficient car, a Toyota Camry 300 miles from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. But leaf blowers are one of the most polluting of all yard implements. If you use a leaf blower for an hour, it's like driving that car 1,100 miles, almost four times the impact of a lawnmower. So, when you see people out with their gas-powered leaf blowers, this is having a big climate impact. Okay, people filling up their lawnmowers and their gas-powered leaf blowers managed to spill 17 million gallons of fuel a year. And this is an old number. This is probably a 10-year-old number. So this is, even higher now. And when we spill fuel, of course, that gasoline evaporates and that contributes greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Residential lawns are often over-fertilized. There are instructions on the web from the University of Maryland Extension on how to calibrate your spreader so that you don't put out too much fertilizer. But I try to go through these instructions, and A, they're confusing, B, they take a lot of time. And I would venture to guess that almost no one does this. I think most people, when they want to fertilize their lawn, just go to Home Depot or wherever and pick up a bag of fertilizer and say, I'm going to use this whole thing. And they, however much that is, they just put it on. And when we have too much fertilizer on the lawn, so fertilizer, of course, is made from synthetic nitrogen, that is nitrogen which is made through a chemical process. And when you put this nitrogen on the, outside on the yard, some of it is converted into nitrate, NO3, which is water soluble. That runs off and goes down to the Chesapeake Bay or other bodies of water and causes the dead zones that you hear so much about. Another part of the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer that is applied to lawns is converted by microbes into a gas, nitrous oxide, okay, N2O, and that is emitted into the air. And nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas that is like 380 times more powerful in that greenhouse gas impact than carbon dioxide. So a little bit of nitrous oxide really has a big impact. In fact, there's 10 times more nitrogen and chemical runoff, again, runoff through the nitrate, from lawns per acre than from farms. Now, everybody, I think, gives farmers, or a lot of people give farmers a hard time about how much fertilizer they're using. And obviously, they are using a lot of fertilizer, and a lot of that is running off. But in Maryland, farmers have to have a nutrient management plan. So they really have to account for how much nitrogen they put down on their fields. Nobody's making residential homeowners account for that. And so a tremendous amount of nitrogen and chemicals, yard chemicals, run off into the water system from our lawns. And I've already described how lawn is such a poor habitat. So lawn contributes to all four of our key environmental problems. And also there's a big economic cost of residential and municipal lawns. Now, I usually try to ask people, what was the last time you thought about what it's costing you to take care of your lawn? Okay. And when I used to have the privilege of being able to give talks in person, I would ask people, and they would say, I never think about that. It's just like, I've got this yard, I take care of it. there it is. We're all used, if you grew up in the suburbs like I did, I grew up in the suburbs, and everybody was mowing their lawn all the time. Our dads were mowing the lawn, our brothers were mowing the lawn, and we just grew up with this. It's like, okay, this is like part of life. Just because we're used to it doesn't mean that it's good. So when it comes to residential lawn maintenance, you either do it yourself or you hire somebody to do it. Now, I got these pictures off the web a few years ago, and for Maryland, they're really not very accurate. I would really like to know where you can buy a John Deere lawnmower for $1,500, but okay. Anyway, so you've got to buy the equipment. If you're going to do it yourself, you got to do the maintenance and repairs or pay somebody to do that. You've got to, pay for parts and all that stuff. And if you hire somebody to do it, again, this is sort of comical for Maryland. The average lawn mowing price across the US a few years ago was $45 for a half an acre. In Maryland, you can't even get somebody to drive up to your house with a lawnmower for $45. So if you multiply whatever you are paying for each lawn mow by the 30 mowings per year that most people have, that's a lot of money. Okay, even at $45, it's probably twice or three times that much in Maryland. So it costs a lot to take care of the lawn. Plus, you have to buy, if you're doing it yourself, you have to buy fertilizer, herbicides. You might have to do core aeration, put insecticides on, fungicides. If you hire out your lawn maintenance, your lawn guys are going to say, well, hey, we need to do this fertilizer. We need to put down pre-emergent herbicide. We need to do core aeration. I want to sell you this fertilizer program. And so that, adds to the cost. If you do it yourself, you're spending a lot of time, 70 to 100 hours a year, which you could be spending doing something else. Okay, so it's not cheap to maintain your lawn. Municipal open space. I live in Howard County, and I've talked to the utilities guys there who, keep the place looking like this, really nice. Howard County has 4,000 acres of mowed grass outside of parks, okay, and playing fields. And they hire this out, they contract it out and pay $2,000 an acre per year to maintain this lawn. Okay, like this. Now, $2,000 an acre times 4,000 acres. This is, if I can do my math, like $8 million a year to cut the grass. That's a lot of taxpayer dollars. Okay, so with that said, I will say that it is hard to implement low-mow lawn on a scale of this, nature to 4,000 acres. That would be pretty hard to do, but it's still worth thinking about how much it's costing. Okay, now, why does lawn need so much maintenance? Watering, fertilizing, etc. This picture shows the above ground and below ground parts of a variety of native plants, and then there's lawn. Okay, so here's the depth in feet. If you look at these various native plants like goldenrod, or this is big bluestem, it's a native grass that occurs in Maryland. Wild indigo occurs in Maryland. Purple coneflower occurs in Maryland. Indian grass. You look at some of these, and many of them go down 5, 10, a few even as much as 15 feet. Their roots are going down. This is part of why they help build such healthy soil. But they can gather water and nutrients from, way down in the soil like this. Lawn, this is Kentucky bluegrass. The roots of lawn are a few inches, okay? So lawn can't really gather up a lot of water or nutrients from soil because it just doesn't have enough roots. And it doesn't help that you drive over it all the time with a lawnmower or whatever, compacting the soil. So I think of lawn as like the infant of landscape plants. You have to provide lawn with everything because it cannot do anything for itself. These plants, their roots are covered with naturally occurring microbes, which fight pathogens and do a lot of other great stuff. In lawn, nope, you don't have that stuff. So that's part of the big problem. Now, what can we do if we want to minimize the costs of having this lawn? A couple different approaches. One, you can just take your lawn away, just remove your lawn and replace it with native plants. And, a lot of times, people get this advice. If you want to have a really eco yard, you need to take out your lawn. Well, this is okay for experienced gardeners, but it's really threatening for regular people. If you talk to just a regular person who's not out there gardening every weekend or every, all the time, like I'm sure some of you all are, it can be pretty threatening. And also it's very hard to find alternatives to grass for these large scale landscapes, as I mentioned, municipal landscapes. Here's an example of a backyard project that it turned out really great, where someone, Ingrid Blanton, the woman in that I met in Easton, sent me these pictures because I gave a talk in her garden club. And so she decided she was going to just take out her whole lawn. So she did. It was a lot of work. She set out these beds. She put in, beautiful native plants in the beds. She created pathways out of micro clover. And, the end result is absolutely beautiful. Okay. Now this is a lot of work. And, to say again, take out your lawn, a lot of work. Regular people who, don't have the time or skill or motivation to do this. I mean, I love this, right? I would love to wake up and have my yard look like this. Regular people might be better off just accepting a little imperfection. My mom really loved the lawn. She never worked in it, but she loved the lawn. And she, had guys coming and doing stuff to it all the time. It was perfect. It was, like one of those perfect lawns. Everything was always the same height. There were no weeds. I mean, she had to put a lot of stuff on the lawn. So our yard was like a toxic waste area. But, okay, I was a kid, so I didn't have any input on that. My advice is accept imperfection. Just stop using fertilizers and chemicals. Let the lawn go dormant in the summer. If it turns brown, don't worry about it. It's just resting. If you water it as infrequently as twice a month or even every 3 weeks, it's not going to die. So it'll be fine. Mow it high with a mulching mower so it returns the clippings to the lawn where they can decompose and feed the lawn in the future. My motto is, if it's green, just mow it. Okay. Here's my part of my backyard. I have a backyard area and then a bunch of other places, but there's a lot of clover and violets in here, a lot of, weeds, crabgrass. I just don't care. Okay. So I just mow it, keep it green. I can play out there with my dog or whatever, kids, and it's low and green and looks fine to me. But this is not satisfactory for a lot of people. So there's got to be some in between ground. If you want to reduce the environmental impact of your lawn and have it look a lot more perfect than this, you need to find some substitute that's climate friendly. And I call this the lawn mimic, these low input grasses. Lawn mimics are good because they maintain that look of lawn, green, low, somewhat uniform and nice looking. And these lawn mimics are a mix of low growing grasses, which are fine fescues. These are not native, they are introduced, but they are very useful environmentally because they do not require a lot of fertilizer or mowing. You can add microclover, which is clover that has fewer blossoms and smaller leaves, or just regular white clover, both of which add nitrogen to the soil. And the great thing is they look like regular lawn. Here's the lawn of a friend of mine in Columbia, Maryland, who also heard one of my talks and decided he wanted to do this in his yard. This is the most successful fine fescue yard I've ever seen. He mixed in some microclover. This was the first year the microclover was really in there. He's since overseeded it at least once to increase the density of the fine fescues, and it looks great, just beautiful. He spent a lot of time on this. This is one of my efforts at my place, which is a lot more rustic than this, but next to my driveway, I planted this fine fescue to see what it would look like. And this is how it looks when it was mowed to 5 inches. And I let it grow so that I didn't have to mow it so often. And the blades of the grass will grow to about 11 or 12 inches. They sort of flop over. I don't object to this, but some people might, and you'd have to mow it a few extra times for that. But you don't have to add fertilizer or chemicals. There's only 10 to 20% as much mowing. If you want to keep it, looking like this, maybe 30% as much mowing as regular lawn. But this is up to, if you have 20% as much mowing, you have 80% less carbon dioxide emissions. So you're reducing your climate impact considerably. And there's a little bit of carbon sequestration because the roots of the fine fescues go down maybe around 10 or 12 inches. But the point of if you want to have a climate impact, the point of using these fine fescues is not to store a lot of carbon in the soil like native plants will do, but to reduce mowing. And I was fortunate enough to get a grant from Howard County, a Howard County innovation grant, to test some different mixes of these fine fescues. And these are the plots, some of the plots I set out in I had to do it in my yard because we started this project in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and we couldn't, get volunteers to help us. So I just did it in my yard. Each one of these is a different plot. And you can see that basically, I think it looks really pretty great. There are a few glitches, but if you work it out, you can actually have a landscape that looks pretty good. And this stuff stays green all winter long. It's really awesome. Okay, so moving on from the lawn mimics, let's talk about how you can sort of reduce your lawn in stages. Okay, instead of saying I'm going to take out all my lawn, you can, let's imagine you have a landscape that looks like this. This is sort of typical suburban that you might find in Maryland. So here's a house. This is one of those subdevelopments where there's no fences, and so there's just this contiguous lawn. Everybody knows where their lot line is, but there's a few trees around the edge, maybe a few landscape plants. But the one way you can start is by adding some more native trees and shrubs around the edge, okay, like this. And then start building in beds where you can plant native perennial plants coming out from the border of trees and shrubs. And so you can also enhance the border around your house, build some more beds along the side and in the back, and enhance the front, fill in this little area, maybe put in a bed of perennial plants across the front. And a big bonus for Marylanders now is that the legislature passed a bill saying that homeowner associations cannot tell you that you must maintain only turf grass in your front lawn. You can make a front lawn that looks like this with native plants and trees and shrubs. You don't have to just have this wasteland of grass anymore. So your homeowner association cannot force you to keep a conventional lawn in the front yard. So widen these beds over time with additional perennials until you just have a small lawn around the house. So these people, in this drawing from these landscape architect people, reduce the amount of lawn, well, I don't know percentage wise, but by a great fraction. So, this doesn't have to be done all at once. You can do it over time. So if you have a tree in the middle of your lawn, you can make a little bed around it. You can plant native perennials in the bed. That's a way of, you don't have lawn around this tree anymore. This is one of my favorites, actually. Golden groundsel. It has these fantastic yellow flowers in the spring. It's evergreen, and it's native, and it's a perennial, so it has everything going for it. It fills in this whole space with nice green leaves that are green all winter. So I really love it. Anyway, this is a strategy for reducing your lawn. It's always a good idea to increase the use of native perennials in your landscape beds, because these are plants that will attract pollinators, will increase biodiversity, etc. Also, compared to using annuals, here's like annuals at Home Depot or someplace. Perennials are awesome because they just come back by themselves every year. Yay. You don't have to go to Home Depot and buy this stuff. These are all potted up in peat-based mix in plastic containers, etc. So if you have perennials and you don't have to go buy these, then that reduces your carbon footprint. The deep-rooted native plants help manage stormwater and store carbon in the soil. And you can put these native plants out in a lot of different settings. Here's some in a vacant area in near a city. Here's some in near a ball field in a municipal setting. Here's a National Park Service installation in just a nice flower bed. This is the former headquarters of Annapolis Green down in Annapolis, and Elvia Thompson, who has now retired, but was the head of that for a long time, planted this beautiful pollinator garden around their building, and there was no lawn at all. So, I mean, a very small lot, so it was not that hard to fill it up, but still, it was really a nice touch down in downtown Annapolis. You can plant native perennials at any scale in containers, raised beds like this. You can plant it in open space, in a homeowner association. This is from a book, but this is a beautiful native meadow around a catchment pond, and it helps to filter the water. It's really a great thing for stormwater management. This is in front of a condo, a little tiny front yard, but a lot of native plants. And again, here's Annapolis Green's headquarters. So one problem with planting perennial beds is you usually have to do a lot of hand weeding until usually you would plant them with small plugs or little plants until the plants grow up and shade everything. You can have a lot of weeds. So part of our Howard County grant was to test this awesome stuff. I'm a big believer of this stuff, horticultural paper. It's like the weight of a paper grocery bag, but it comes in these rolls you can roll out. And we tested just bare ground and then some of this paper, and we had one more treatment, but it didn't work. So I'll just show you the outcomes of using the paper versus just planting these plugs in bare ground. And so here's what a plot looked like. We had a certain number of plugs we wanted to put in. So I dug the holes for those with this awesome tool here, which does not force you to crouch. This is called a Pro Plugger. I'm not trying to sell this, but I find this a very handy tool. And then I put paper over for the plots with the paper. I put paper over and then cut holes where the holes in the ground were, and turned under the edges and planted. So what happened here? When we did the weeding, of course, which was necessary because I had planted this bed in what was a former pasture. I killed off the grass, but grass came back. The bare ground, it took me 2 hours and 20 minutes on average to weed a 4x6 foot plot. And 4 weeks later, there's a lot of empty spaces because I think I probably pulled out a bunch of the native plant plugs that I had put in there because I couldn't tell what they were. When I planted through the paper, here's what the plots look like after about 3 or 4 weeks, I think. And you can see that there might be a few weeds in the holes around where I planted each plug, but there's no weeds in between. So it only took me 45 minutes to weed these. 4 weeks later, the canopy is starting to close, and then I didn't need to weed anymore. So I planted these in late June, and the paper lasted till the end of the season when I didn't need it anymore because the plants got big and filled things in. I use this in my garden also for, transplants like basil and other things. It really solves the weed problem. I love this stuff. It's called Weed Guard. You can get it at a variety of places. Okay, let's turn to stormwater for a minute. Stormwater is a gigantic problem because, people put all sorts of stuff around on the roads and it clogs the drains, and there's oil going down, and nutrients from fertilizer go into the water, trash is in there. It's just a big mess. And I found this book, which I found very inspiring, called Low Impact Development, a Design Manual for Urban Areas. And they point out a few things about the pollution that is in, basically in storm, that is washed into the waterways by stormwater. In many cases, the first flush of stormwater in an urban area may have a level of contamination higher this is of chemicals and bacteria, much higher than normally present in sewage. It's not good, right? So we're washing this all down into the waterways. Their premise: what if urban stormwater infrastructure enhanced ecological functioning to serve as a civic asset rather than an environmental liability? This is great. You know, I'm all for this. So let's just pursue this for a few minutes. They talk about flattening the curve. And, you know, we all heard about this at the beginning of COVID. Flattening the curve means just spread out the impact over time. And when we talk about flattening the stormwater curve, here's a graph of runoff volume and time. And the curves show essentially the discharge of stormwater in runoff before and after urbanization. Before urbanization, a lot more stormwater soaked in. And so you see a very flat curve. It's not being discharged very much. And what is being discharged comes out over a long period of time. After urbanization, you have a rain. This is time after a rain. You have a rain, and there's just this gigantic amount of water that very quickly moves down the storm sewer. So the volume problem is that stormwater runs off too fast, and that causes flooding because, if the sewers, storm sewers are clogged with stuff, then your road floods because the water can't go away. And if the water does go down the storm sewer, then the surface water creeks and other streams flood because the water reaches them so fast. So stormwater has two problems: the volume problem and the pollution problem. Stormwater carries all this stuff: fertilizer, chemicals, waste, bacteria, stuff you don't want in the waterways. The solution, okay, reduce runoff, slow it down, spread it out, soak it in. This is sort of the stormwater solution through what's called green infrastructure instead of hard infrastructure, which is concrete. Okay, so again, from this book, they talk about botanizing the city. Well, right off the bat, that sounds like something that might be interesting. And the idea is manage the stormwater on site, that is where it falls, okay, with plants, using plants. This turns the stormwater problem into a civic asset because you plan areas that have plants that can soak up, help soak up the water and improve the soil so that stormwater infiltrates more into the soil rather than just running off. So this is what an area where urban and natural systems are connected. Here's a little suburb or something, and we've got, you know, various natural systems around it. Now, this is not an urban area in the sense of, you know, in Baltimore, you're not going to have all this stuff really close to houses like this, but the idea is to link the urban with the suburban and rural by having more plants in the urban settings. And the vision is this: stop transporting stormwater through pipes or, you know, down the sewer, et cetera. So here's polluted runoff. This is hard engineering, where we transport it to, you know, somewhere. A catch basin is part of a stormwater system designed to trap debris and sediment before it enters the network. That's fine. Sometimes it works. Here's a storm grate. Runoff goes down in here. It's filled with pollutants, bacteria, petroleum-based products, heavy metals, sediment, etc. And it just goes right into the waterway. Okay. Over here, if you have plants in residential landscapes, municipal landscapes, this is called soft engineering, green infrastructure. And this treats the water on site, okay? So a lot more of the water soaks in, okay? Some of it is actually absorbed and used by the plant, of course, which is pretty great. And you have a root system which helps to purify the water. I'm not expecting you to be reading all of this stuff, but the idea here is that the plants help purify the water and slow it down before it gets to streams and to the bay. And how do you do that? You control the flow by, you know, having places where water can go through. You slow it down with detention ponds or retention ponds. I'm not exactly sure the big difference between this. You set things up so that water can filter through better, rather than just have a lot of hard asphalt where it runs off. You have a permeable surface where some water can soak through. You set up areas like this, rain gardens or conservation landscaping, or in municipal or residential areas, or I love this, in municipal areas next to the street, a big area of native plants that soaks up the water and cleans it, because it's soaking into the soil where microbes chew up a lot of, I mean, I don't know if you knew this or not, but microbes in the soil actually eat yard chemicals. They use that as nutrient, and they also use some of the nitrogen, et cetera. So if you have soil and you let the water soak into the soil, it cleans that water, which is really good. So slow it down, spread it out, soak it in. Stormwater with plants, residential. So a lot of suburbs have these catchment ponds, which are usually surrounded by grass, and they are getting the runoff from the yards in the neighborhood, and it's basically running down into this. And you can see in this case, this is from a book about native meadows, but in this case, there's a lot of algal growth and junky stuff growing. So this is one way to manage the water. You slow it down into this catchment pond. But the person who wrote this book, Catherine Zimmerman, pointed out that you could put a native meadow around here instead. Now, the city and developer people all want to be able to mow this and, take care of it in some easy way. It's a little harder to structure it like this. But if you have this, then the plants catch a lot of the chemicals and nutrients and prevent it from going into this catchment pond and basically becoming filled with nutrients. I would love to see more streets with this kind of planting along the edge. Here's a subdevelopment where they've put this looks like maybe there's a little stream or something. They've put more plants around the stream, and so when water drains down from the yards, it's going into this green infrastructure rather than just going down the storm drain. Okay, so carrying on in the lot around your house. Here's a picture from Montgomery County Department of Environmental Quality. Here's some conservation, so-called conservation landscaping, native plants in a bed, and you can direct water to this in some cases like this. Okay, here's a picture where here's a rain barrel. It can overflow down this creek bed. You direct the water into, a garden bed or into a flower bed, and that slows it down. You can have pervious pavement. You can catch the water and use it on your yard through a hose, or you can just let it overflow if you have a place for it to go. Swales. I love swales. Swales are just sort of contouring your yard so that water is controlled. Now, I think probably all homeowners are aware that if your home is downhill from someplace where water is going to drain, it's going to go right in your basement and make your basement wet. So I mean, most people know that you need to have a little elevated place around your house. But if you have this is a really bad situation, but if you have a situation like this, you can make a swale and direct the water down this shallow ditch, and it'll take it away from your basement. You have to have somebody come in with a bobcat or whatnot and move the dirt around so that you construct this thing. But there's a lot of different ways that you can make these swales. You can make them shallow enough so you can just run your lawnmower through there and fill them with lawn. You can put stones in, you can put wetland plants in, you can mix stones and plants. You can make it deeper so that the water, might be retained for longer, and it would keep these wetland plants going. This is a example of a swale. This is a great website, 10thacrefarm.com. I didn't really realize what the property of this person was, but she started this website. She's really has a lot of great ideas. And I thought they actually had a little farm, but when she says 10th acre farm, she has a 1/10 acre lot. And this is her front yard. So she made this swale by making a trench, and then she made a little berm, and she put a walkway, and the whole thing directs water into this bed where she's got a bunch of native plants and some strawberries and other good stuff. But this is a really beautiful addition to her front lawn, and she totally solved her water problem by making this swale. Again, it's a lot of work to do it yourself, but you can hire people to do this. Rain gardens. A rain garden is a little bit more complicated than what I call just a conservation landscaping bed. A rain garden has engineering features, which I'll mention in the next slide, but these are some rain garden areas that Montgomery County helped residents put in. They give them a subsidy for this. And so they came in and they dug it out and made a little drainage out of it. So each one has an area for, water to drain in or out. And they're, really beautiful. This is the 10th acre farm again. This is David Alexander. He has a landscape bed like this that helps soak up water. Rain gardens, formal rain gardens usually involve a bunch of digging. You have to remove some soil, maybe add some soil back, maybe put in an overflow drainage thing. There's usually some engineering involved, and you have to get professional help for that. But when a rain garden is installed, the water is directed right into that rain garden, perpendicular to the berm, so it collects, and the native plants you put in there help to use some of that water, and they also build the soil so that a lot of the water soaks in. Okay, now if you want to implement these things, like put beds of native plants or put rain gardens or whatnot, and you live in a neighborhood with a homeowner association or just a lot of neighbors close by, it's really a good idea to sort of be aware that not everybody is on the same page when it comes to wanting to rebuild the soil or rebuild biodiversity. Some people just like lawn. They just want only lawn, and that's what they think is acceptable. And there are a lot of places where neighbors will complain if you start putting in plants that do not look like lawn. If that's the case, it's a good idea to know the rules of your homeowner association. Again, as I pointed out, in Maryland, the homeowner association cannot force you not to have a bed of, native plants like this in your front yard. But it's a really good idea to make your yard sort of fit in. So if you want to replace your lawn, you can have some lawn mimic, and keep it mowed, maybe 5 inches. You don't have to have regular grass, but, keep it neat. And then if you have a big bed of these are tall plants, some of them maybe 5 or 6 feet, you organize it so that people know you're taking care of it. This is called cues to care. So this is a beautiful bed here, has an edge of mowed grass. It could be lawn mimic, it could be regular grass, it doesn't matter. But this lets your neighbors know you haven't just abandoned your lot. It's not going to turn into a vacant lot. People who don't understand plants and don't understand nature don't realize that, anything that's taller than, 10 inches is not bad. I think I've heard people say, their yard looks like a vacant lot. Well, no, no vacant lot looks like this. So there's a little education, but if you put down these cues to care, like a mowed border or a bird bath or a sign, then that lets people know that this was intentional. It's always a good idea to share your vision and your design with the neighbors before you put it in. Start small, or maybe start in the backyard. You could reach out to the homeowner association board or your local government with information on the value of planting native plants and the cost savings of your plan. I mean, just give people information, and during the process, be enthusiastic, be persistent, but stay positive. Okay. This is an environmental benefit. This is saving money. This is helping purify the water. This is reducing flooding. You know, these are all good things. And I'm going to take care of it. It's going to look beautiful. So I don't know if any of you've had experience with this or not. So I'll just sum up and say it's totally possible to manage our suburban landscapes in ways that reduce carbon emissions. So that's a climate benefit. In some cases, store carbon in the soil, another carbon benefit, and increase biodiversity. Not mentioned on here is control water flow. Like, I love this. Wouldn't you love to see every boulevard, you know, in Maryland that has a big separate, you know, here's lanes on different sides, right? With native plants down the middle. If you look at the grass on these boulevards, usually it's sloped so that the water does flow down to the center. Why not fill that up with native plants and let them help purify the water? Seems like a great idea. This is a picture of before and after. A friend of mine in a Columbia neighborhood worked with her board, convinced them what a good idea would be to have a sort of pollinator garden with a bench and a little lending library and places for people to sit and gather and talk. And this homeowner association paid their landscaper to put this in, which I couldn't believe. So, you know, Jean, very convincing, patient, positive, made something really nice happen. This was right after it was installed. It really looks beautiful now. Again, here's David Alexander's yard. This is the full progression of this landscaping I showed you earlier, from sort of mostly bare ground. This is now expanded around one house. But if you have a bunch of houses in the neighborhood like this, and you can talk to your neighbors, then you can actually put in a lot of native trees and shrubs and native plants and have corridors, and that really builds up the biodiversity in the neighborhood. So I'm going to end there.